Marx and Engels find individual recognition by the labor process and material interaction. Thus, something totally interconnected, something that posits our individual humanity is this very material way we produce and organize. Therefore, humane conditions, and quality material life is necessary for everyone, is to ensure this forward movement of humanity. But this materialism, the material referent, is also the driving indicator of history itself. Marx and Engels claim that for history to move forward, the core conditions to live must be present. In the context of history moving forward is dictated by This process of history takes the process that young Hegelians employ, that of history being a dialectic of consciousness moving forward. This historical separation. Second, the world and how it descriptively operates isn't from pure competition, but cooperation. Just under current economic context, this production and cooperation is weaponized in a competitive economic sense. Thus, if our natural human state is cooperation, we are living in an artificial, inharmonious system where our current economic situation is one of artificiality based on antagonistic competition. This moves us into ideology, where we see the historical and material referent for emerging ideology, that coming from town and country, to the division of labor. To Marx and Engels, this division of labor is the newer industrial practices of smaller specified jobs for individuals, often materially referenced as being a line factory worker with a repetitive, specified job. But the consequence of this newly created labor process is detrimental to Marx and Engels, not necessarily because material factory work on its own is bad, but the larger social consequences of this new labor process has destroyed some of the most presciently universal components of our humanity. It divides workers, divides common people, and creates needless workplace antagonism. It alienates us from the process of true creation and ownership. We become manipulated cogs in a machine process where we do not own the outcome. This kills what Marx and Engels calls our species essence, the ability to be creative, live in a meaningful life. This is also where Marx and Engels find the process of true alienation, where they find difference in Hegel's idea of alienation itself. Something truly evident in the new industrial process, the very new process of labor. Hegel, along with the young Hegelians, with some minor variations, find alienation as a sense of subjective, meaningless, existential anxiety. Not at home, alien feeling around the self and a separation from the world. From here, through the process of self-discovery, we can overcome this and conclude that this alien separation from the world isn't truly so, that the world and ourselves aren't truly separate. To Marx and Engels, they carry this concern in form of alienation from Hegel, but argue it can be more materially referenced through the labor process, of a feeling of inhumanity from tedious, meaningless work, of a lack of ownership, of losing creativity. For Marx and Engels, this is the result of the division of labor, and something that created a universal crisis that must be addressed for humanity to thrive and move forward. But this new ideological tonality moves further. It moves us into the actual concrete socioeconomic separation, a relatively newer divide of town and country at the time of industrial capitalism. Marx and Engels explained the process of this divide from late feudalism to early capitalism, from the process of serfs moving into trade guilds within the city and merchants facilitating larger trade between towns. But we see through time, the inner towns and their manufacturing ended up outpacing the country and rural communities. Thus, there is a dual antagonism that hurts both. But here is the important dialogue on ideology. Everything about the division of labor and town and country is the material referent to current ideology. It is the very material reason for ideology itself. But here's where we get to the actual ideological commentary. Marx and Engels are claiming that ideology is established through history and material interaction. It's not something we purely think, but it's something we concretely do as well, despite potential objections. In the past, feudalism created a master-slave relationship of serf and lord. This ideological structure moved into capitalism, with the capitalist and the worker, which formed the larger separation of town and country, where the manufacturing of the town subjected the country to a slave-like economic relationship. Ideology is the material process of doing in concrete interactions and relationships, and at the time of writing the German ideology, the prevailing ideology is of a history of master-slave relationships, a dual antagonism that hurts the unified nature of what makes us human. We see this with the division of labor, and we see this with town and country, as the current ideology is usually posited from the powerful class, as to legitimize the material state of things, creating what Marx and Engels call false consciousness. This is the function of ideology. And Marx and Engels' view of it can be summed up with this. The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. Hence, of the relationships which make the one class the ruling one, therefore the ideas of its dominance. This entire book thus far has been an elaboration on the interconnectedness of the world and social systems at large. Prior existing empirical form of looking at the world involved things that were isolated. Government does government things. Economics does economic things. The Marx and Engels examining social structures in isolation is totally incorrect. Luckily, in many ways, Hegel paved the way for a dialectical, connected way of viewing the world. But in traditional fashion, within the German ideology, it still falls short. The Hegelian interconnected lens still existed too much as pure thought. Rather, they claim this can be viewed more concretely through the social structures at play. This brings us to the relation of state and law to property. This section offers some of the first insights into Marx and Engels' analysis of the political economy, a field of study that emerged in the 18th century as to understand the relation to production, property, with government, and law, with its total intersected nature. Marx and Engels claim that the political economy gives us massive answers on ideology, on trajectory of production. And at the time of writing the German ideology, economic development in industrial capitalism was moving fast. Thus, we see some of the most significant analysis on how capitalism operates, an analysis that is still regrettably holding up today. Here, there is a direct intersection between production, trade, and government, and the ultimate concrete material reality shows that the state serves as facilitator of whatever mainstream mode of production that exists, whether that be in feudal society or in modern capitalism. For Marx and Engels, the prior approach to the state purely impacting commerce is wrong. There is a dialectic in play that through the process and accumulation of capital, commerce, and trade actually influences the state, not the other way around like typically stated. Even today, we usually think of this relationship in reverse. Along with state apparatuses in its current relationship with commerce, This brings us into the newer conception of private property, which has, through history, also undergone a process through tribal property, feudal lands, capital, etc., all the way to the time of this writing. What Marx and Engels called pure private property. Through this historical process, property itself has become abstracted from original social communal relationship. Private property as it now exists enters a singular, unconnected antagonism with the community. And through this process of accumulation, the bourgeoisie own more and more and more, to the point that the entire order of capitalism falls apart, with the state, who isn't truly separate from capital, enforces this new same cycle. Marx and Engels call this reinforcement the political form of law. Law as to uphold the cycle in mode of property ownership. They also take aim at the idea that property, as stated by prior theorists such as Locke, is the expression of the general will. As we stated earlier, this property is abstracted. Our new system of property operates as truly separate from the community. Yet in reality, it doesn't actually work like that. It cannot. Everything is interconnected and requires input and outputs from other people, despite property being owned by one person. Thus, this creates a contradiction, an ironic contradiction that makes the complete community poor in the end, as the bourgeoisie, as the larger class, ends up sucking up resources in a capitalist system. Our failure to account for this new phenomenon also reinforces new alienation, an alienation that kills self-worth, esteem, ownership, and creation, because philosophy is now structured from the viewpoint that we are not material, organic beings, but specters, ghosts that conceptually live in atmosphere. Marx and Engels claim that new movements towards communism will be other thus the communists upper class is usually winning that war. When we truly examine nations, we understand the rather inorganic nature with which of our social relations of the past, and of the artificial construction of it via a bourgeoisie class itself. Therefore, it is the future in which we can attempt to create a more cohesive, fruitful, humane world. That future, to Marx and Engels, is held within the communist movement. What is important here is that capitalism works in contradictions. It emancipates through immediate control of property, yet strips commons from citizens. It frees immediate tribal and certain religious ties, then alienates what it means to be human, of creation, of imprint. From this, we have established the process of humanity, social structures, relies on a process of material interaction. Thus, communism is arguably the first revolutionary movement that seeks to change this fundamental order of interaction and exchange. Here it must be noted, Marx and Engels are not negating the individual, like typically stated. Rather, they take an opposite approach. Only through engagement with the community, human interaction, cooperation, can we actually recognize our forms of individual humanity itself. The form of dialectics have not been lost. Marx and Engels use dialectics in a material context to show how we recognize ourselves through the community, the contradictions of property, etc. And most of all, dialectics show us that capitalism continually falls on its head and creates its own demise. It divides workers, it even sucks up competition, and even the bourgeoisie will grow smaller and smaller through corporate trust, only to break every 10 years. This is the process of big industry. At the end of the book, Marx and Engels summarize with these conclusions. The first is, the division of labor and capitalism at large, by default, show that workers are unnecessarily pitted against each other. Rather than being productive forces, workers are now destructive forces in a market context. It alienates and forces antagonism on humanity. The second is that through history and the German ideologies of the time of writing, capital has created a new division of labor in the state that exists outside of humanity, independent, yet only reinforces the upper class in the end. The bourgeoisie, thus, prior revolution and new revolution will have to be class-orientated and directed at another class, namely for the working class against the bourgeoisie. Revolutions of the past were class-orientated, yet the new future revolutions will have to realize this in the act of revolution itself. The third is that every historical revolution hasn't contended with the mode of activity, of interaction and exchange. Thus, it hasn't been revolutionary in the context needed. Communism seeks to abolish the division of labor, create human conditions for all, and abolish class itself. The fourth is to reach this point to rid ourselves of capitalism, the division of labor, alienation via the labor process. Revolution is necessary, and it cannot happen without a complete structural change of society at large, interaction, the state, and commerce. This must happen in a universal global context as well. On the process of revolution, Marx and Engels leads us with this. Both for the production on a mass scale of this communist consciousness, and for the success of the cause itself. The alteration of men on a mass scale is necessary. Alteration, which only can take place in a practical movement, a revolution. This revolution is necessary. Therefore, not only because the ruling class cannot be overthrown in any other way, but also because the class overthrowing it can only in a revolution succeed in ridding itself of all the muck of the ages and become fitted to found society anew. Thank you all so much for watching. The German ideology is pretty essential as to understand the placement of Marxism within the philosophical history at large. As always, these videos take an absolutely huge amount of time.
Okay. So, that was just the closest I could get to something that would give a little context to the chapter for today, because it's dealing with the early lives of Marx and Engels and everything that came with that. Did anybody have any questions about anything in the video as of right now, or did anybody check to see if the terminology link worked, so that we have that? I don't know. I know I had posted it.
I don't see it. Where would it be?
It was in the Discord. I could post it in this chat, I think, though. I'll do that. I'll do that after class, because it should be okay for now. That way we can get on with the reading. All right, so we're starting today on chapter 4, which is the early lives of Marx and Engels until they became Marxists.
Can you share it on your screen?
Yes, I should be able to. Hang on. Do this. Right, and man. Is that there?
Yep, it's there, comrade.
Excellent, thank you. All right. I'll turn this my way.
Oh, wait, no, it's not, but that might just be me. Now my phone screen just says Amanda's iPhone, so maybe it's not there. No, it's not.
Let's see. I will try. Let's try this real quick. Stop that one. Start this one again, and we'll pick this.
Pick full screen, I think.
There
Okay.
you go.
There now.
Excellent. Perfect. All right. So, obviously, nobody can be born a Marxist, not even Marx. There has to be a process through which ideas and views are developed and formulated and take basic shape, which can be called an ideology. Naturally, Marx and Engels had to go through such a process too before they came to discover and themselves grasp the basic truths of what we today know as Marxism. This process of thought was naturally determined to a great extent by the concrete experiences that both of them went through. In order therefore to understand this is in some depth, let us briefly look at the early life experiences of these two great teachers. So Karl Marx was born on the 5th of May, 1818 in the town of Trier in what was then called Rhenish Prussia, and which is today part of Germany. His father, Heinrich Marx, was one of the top lawyers of the town. Family was well-to-do and cultured, but not revolutionary. Both of Marx's parents came from a long line of Jewish priests. Thus, though they were economically well off, they had to face social discrimination in the anti-Jew atmosphere of Prussia. In 1816, Marx's father was forced to convert to Christianity because the Prussian government enacted a rule stopping Jews from practicing law. Similarly, in 1824, another Prussian law was passed to prevent non-Christians from being admitted to public schools. To overcome this, Heinrich Marx was forced to baptize his son Karl, along with all his brothers and sisters. Thus, though he was no believer in organized religion, Marx's father was forced to adopt a new faith just in order to pursue his profession and give his children a good education. Marx's hometown, Trier, is the oldest town in Germany, which for many centuries had been the residence of German emperors and later the seat of the Catholic bishops, with a religious administration for the town and the surrounding area. In August 1794, the French armies captured the town, instituted a civil administration, and brought in the ideas and institutions of the French Revolution. The town only went back into the hands of the Prussian king after the defeat of France's Napoleon in 1815. Thus, during the time of Marx's birth and youth, it still carried a definite impact of 21 years of French revolutionary ideas. Trier was a small town, similar in size to our smaller Toluca towns, with a population then of around 12,000. It was principally a market town for the surrounding area, which for centuries had been a famous wine growing area. Its population was composed of occupations typical to a service town, civil servants, priests, small merchants, craftsmen, etc. It had remained untouched by the Industrial Revolution and was thus economically relatively backwards. During Marx's youth, it also had a high degree of poverty. The official statistics in 1830 gave an unemployment figure of 1 in every 4, though the actual figure must have been much higher. Beggars and prostitutes were common, and the figures of petty crimes like stealing were extremely high. Thus, Marx from a very young age was witness to the misery of the poor laboring class. After attending elementary school, Marx entered the Friedrich Wilhelm Gymnasium in 1831, from which he graduated in 1835. Within 3 weeks, he was sent for further studies at the law school of the university 40 miles away from Trier in the city of Bonn, which was an important center, which is today the joint capital of Germany. Marx, with the desire to learn as much as possible, immediately registered in 9 courses besides law, including poetry, literature, art, etc. He was at first regular at lectures, but gradually lost interest, particularly in the law lectures, which he found dry and unsatisfying. He reduced his courses first to 6 and then to 4. He decided to study on his own and soon got involved in the stormy life of the students of whom he soon became a leader. Being deeply interested in writing poetry, he also joined the Totenbund, which was a circle of young writers founded by revolutionary students. In the constant struggle between the sons of the feudal nobles and the bourgeoisie, he soon became a leader of the bourgeois group. He was often involved in fistfights and sometimes in sword duels. He carried a stiletto knife, somewhat similar to our Gupti knives, for which he was once arrested and had a police charge put on him. He was also sentenced to 1 day in the university's student prison on charges of nightly uproarious disturbances of the peace and drunkenness. Marx, in one sword duel, was even injured on his right eyebrow. This led to his father withdrawing him from Bonn University and bringing him back to Trier in August 1836. While he was in Trier, he got secretly engaged to Jenny von Westphalen, the daughter of Baron von Westphalen, a nobleman and senior Prussian government official. Jenny, who was 4 years older than him, and Marx were childhood loves who had decided to get married while Marx was still in school. They now got engaged with the approval of Marx's parents, but without Jenny's parents' approval, which was only obtained in 1837. In October 1836, Marx moved to the University of Berlin, which was in the capital of Prussia. The university was much larger than Bonn and was renowned as a major center of learning. After registering for his university courses, Marx immediately jumped into a storm of work. He stayed up night after night, eating irregularly, smoking heavily, reading heavy books, and filling up notebooks. Instead of formal classes, Marx pursued his studies on his own. Working at a tremendous pace, he moved from law to philosophy, to poetry, to art, and then to writing plays and stories, and then back to philosophy and poetry. His overwork had a bad effect on his health, particularly his smoking affected his lungs, and he was sometimes forced to take a break, but he always went back to his excessive work habits, reading up everything, from the ancient to the latest works of scientists and philosophers. His bent was towards philosophy, always trying to find universal meaning, always searching for the absolute principles and the definitions and concepts. During his second year at the university, he joined a group of philosophy students and teachers called the Young Hegelians. They were followers of the famous German philosopher Friedrich Hegel, who had taught at the Berlin University and died in 1830. They tried to give a radical interpretation to Hegel's philosophy, and for this, they were sometimes called left Hegelians. One of Marx's friends in this group, its intellectual leader, was a professor called Bruno Bauer, who was a militant atheist who constantly attacked the church's teachings. Such attacks, along with the radical political views of young Hegelians, made them the target of the Prussian authorities. Thus, when Marx completed his doctoral thesis, he could not obtain his degree from the Berlin University, which was dominated by reactionary appointees of the Prussian government. After completing his studies in Berlin, he submitted his thesis and obtained his PhD in April 1841 from the liberal-leaning University of Jena, that was outside of Prussian control. After obtaining his degree, he had hoped to become a lecturer at Bonn University, where Bruno Bauer had transferred to in 1839. But Bauer himself was in trouble because of the student disturbances his anti-religious lectures were causing. Finally, the king himself ordered the removal of Bauer from Bonn University. This meant the end to Bauer's teaching career, as well as any hope of a teaching job for Marx. But Bauer himself was in trouble because of the student disturbances and religion lectures. Finally, he himself ordered the removal from Bauer. Oh, okay. Right. I just read this. So this meant the end of his teaching career. Marx started concentrating on journalism, which had already started immediately after leaving university. This also helped him to participate more thoroughly in the rapidly growing radical democratic opposition movement. Which was developing in his Rhineland province and the neighboring province of Westphalia. These provinces, which had experienced the liberating influence of the French anti-feudal reforms, were major centers of opposition to the Prussian king. Industrialization had also led to the growth of the bourgeoisie, particularly in Cologne. And the industrialization had also led to the growth of bourgeoisie, particularly in Cologne, rich city in Rhineland. This meant strong support for this radical opposition movement by the industrialists, who were fed up with the excessive controls of the feudals. Marx first started writing for, and then, in October 1842, became the chief editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, a daily newspaper supported by such industrialists. In Marx's hands, the newspapers soon became a fighter for radical democratic rights. This, however, brought Marx into constant conflict with the Prussian censors, who were very repressive. Finally, when the paper published a criticism of the Russian Tsar's despotism, the Tsar himself brought pressure on the Prussian king to take down. The paper was banned and had to be closed down in March 1843. Marx then started involving himself let's see. I don't have the link up anymore. But despotism is. Oh, I have the definition here. I want to take a second to define that, just because it gets used a lot. Despotism is a country or political system where the ruler holds absolute power. So it says the paper was banned and it had to be closed down in March 1843. Marx then started involving himself in a plan to bring out a new journal, the German-French yearbooks. From 1841 to 1843, Marx was deeply involved in the stormy political life of that period. However, he was basically a radical Democrat and did not at the time hold communist views. His major transformation of the level of philosophy during this period in 1841, after reading a book called The Essence of Christianity by Ludwig Feuerbach, which presented a criticism of religion from the standpoint of materialism. This book played a major role in shifting Marx's ideas from the idealism of the young Hegelian group to materialism. Another philosophical work of 1841 was the European Triarchy that influenced Marx was the attempt by his friend Moses Hess to develop a communist philosophy by combining French socialist and left Hegelian ideas. However, at the time, Marx yet had only a limited knowledge of the ideas of the socialists and the communists. His first contact was in 1842 when he read with interest the works of many of the leading French socialist theorists. He was, however, not converted to communism or socialism by these readings. This change came about more through his contact with the working class, the communist groups, and the study of political economy, both of which took place mainly after moving to Paris at the end of 1843. 7 years after their engagements, Marx and Jenny were married in June 1843. They had a short honeymoon in Switzerland, during which Marx wrote a booklet where he presented his initial criticisms of Hegel. After the honeymoon, he started the study and preparations for moving to Paris, from where the earlier mentioned German-French yearbooks was to be launched. This move to Paris was planned in order to avoid the Prussian censors. However, though the journal was planned as a monthly, it collapsed after only one issue that came out in Marx's period in Paris was, however, marked by very significant new experiences. Of the greatest importance was direct contact with the various socialist and communist groups, of which Paris was a hot center. Benefited greatly by regular contact with the many working-class revolutionaries in Paris. At the same time, Marx started a study of political economy in which he read the revolutionary context, and further study had their impact. These reflected Marx's writing. The single issue of the yearbooks was of crucial importance because it contained Marx's first broad generalization of a Marxist materialist understanding of history that was contained in an article criticizing Hegel's philosophy. Let's see here. It was in this article that Marx made the highly important formulation regarding the historical role of the proletariat. He also here made his famous formulation that religion is the opium of the people. The same issue also contained an article by Engels on political economy, which also gave a materialist understanding regarding the development of modern capitalism. It was Marx's interest in Engels' writings that led to their meeting in Paris between August 28 and September 6, 1844. This turned out to be a historic meeting that helped the two So this turned out to be a historic meeting that helped two great thinkers to clarify their ideas, lay down the first foundations of Marxism. Though they had both independently come to similar conclusions earlier, this meeting helped them to achieve complete theoretical agreement. It was at this meeting that they more clearly came into an understanding regarding the materialist conception of history, which was the cornerstone of Marxist theory. Frederick Engels was born on November 28, 1820, in the textile town of Barmen in Frederick Engels, his father was the wealthy owner of a cotton spinning mill and was a fiercely religious Protestant Christian with a reactionary political outlook. Barmen, like Marx Prier, also belonged to the part of Prussia, which had seen 20 years of French conquest. It thus also had progressive influences on it. However, in its main characteristic was that it was one of the biggest Rhenish industrial centers, and thus Engels, from a very early age, saw the severe poverty and exploitation of the working class. To survive against factory competition, craftsmen were forced to work from morning to night. They often they tried to drown their sorrows in drink. Child labor and occupational lung diseases were also rampant. Engels attended the Barmen Town School until the age of 14. He was then sent to the secondary school at the neighboring town of Elberfeld. Today, both Barmen and Elberfeld are merged into one town. This school had the reputation of being one of the best in Prussia. He was an intelligent student with an early flair for learning languages. He was also part of a poetry circle among students and wrote his own poetry and short stories. He was planning to study economy and law. He was planning the student economy and law, but his father was more interested in making his eldest son learn the family business. At the age of 17, he was suddenly removed from school, made to join his So this was the end of Engels' formal schooling. He continued to use his free time to study history, philosophy, literature, and linguistics, and to write poetry, which he was attracted to. The next year, in July 38, in July 1838, Engels was sent to work as a clerk in a large trading firm in the large port city of Bremen. The big city atmosphere brought Engels in contact with foreign literature groups. The big city atmosphere brought Engels in his leisure time started reading fiction and political books. He continued learning new languages and, besides German, got some knowledge of Latin, Greek, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, Dutch, etc. This ability to learn languages continued throughout Engels' life, during which he So let's see. He was also quite fluent in over 20 languages, which was including Persian and Arabic. And while in Bremen, Engels became a good horseman, swimmer, swordsman, and ice skater. While at school, Engels had been a fighter against bureaucracy. Now, as a grown youth, he was attracted to the radical democratic ideas. While at school, Engels had been a fighter against bureaucracy. Now, as a grown youth, he was attracted to the radical democratic ideas of the bourgeois democratic revolution, then taking shape in Germany. First group he was attracted to was the Young German Literary Group that stood for radical political views. He soon started reaching writing for a journal being published by them from the port city of Hamburg, not far from Bremen. He wrote 2 articles on the situation in his home district. He exposed the severe exploitation of the workers in Barmen and Elberfeld, the diseases they suffered, and the fact that half of the children of the town were deprived of school. And let's see, towards the end of 1839, Engels started a study of Hegel, whose philosophy he tried to link with his own radical democratic beliefs. However, he only made progress in this when he finished up his clerkship in Bremen. Let's see. Towards the end of 1839, he started a study of Hegel. Let's see here. He only made progress in this when he finished up his clerkship, Bremen 1841, and after a few months' gap, moved to Berlin for 1 year compulsory military service. While in military service, he joined
You want me to help read? I can finish.
No, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not skipping any terms or anything that I wrote down. And I'm kind of like pausing in case anyone has any questions. Figured it was a little bit better than just constantly asking. That way, if anyone had any questions, when I would pause, they would ask. While in military service, he joined the Berlin University as an external student, did a course in philosophy, then became closely connected with the young Hegelian group, of which Marx had been a part of. He, like Marx, was also influenced greatly by the materialist views in Feuerbach's book that came out in that year. Engels' writings now started to have some materialist aspects. The main thing he always stressed was political action. This was what made him split in 1842 from his earlier young German group. which he felt restricted itself only to empty literary debate. However, he continued to be strongly linked with the young Hegelians, particularly with Bruno Bauer and his brother. It was this closeness of Engels with the Bauers that prevented a friendship with Marx when they met for the first time in November 1842. Engels had finished his military service at that time and was on his way from his hometown to join as a clerk in his father's business in Manchester, England. On the way, he visited Marx at the newspaper office in Cologne, where Marx was the chief editor. Marx, by then, had, however, started criticizing the young Hegelians, and particularly the Bauers, for concentrating their propaganda too much on religion rather than politics. Hence, Marx and Engels, having different political affiliations, could not become close at their first meeting. It was Engels' experience in England that made him a communist. He developed very close links with the workers of Manchester, as well as the leaders of the revolutionary workers in the Chartist movement. Manchester was the main center of the world's modern textile industry, and soon Engels undertook an in-depth study of the working and living conditions of its workers. He regularly visited the working class areas to gain direct knowledge. In this process, love grew between him and Mary Burns, a young Irish factory worker who would later become his companion and wife. Besides collecting materials for his future book on the conditions of the working class in England, Engels came to understand the revolutionary potential of the proletariat. His regular participation in the movement convinced him that the working class was not merely a suffering class, but a fighting class. His regular participation in the movement convinced him that the working class was not merely a suffering class, but a fighting class. Besides working class contact, Engels had also made a deep study of the various socialist and communist theories, and even met many of the French and German leaders and writers who had formulated them. Though he did not adopt any of these theories, he let's see. At the same time, he started a deep study of bourgeois political economy. This was in order to help him analyze the economic relations of society, which he had started feeling was the basis of all social change. The initial results of his study he put down in his article that was published by Marx in his journal published in Paris. As we mentioned earlier, this led to the correspondence between Marx and Engels in their historic meeting in 1844. Engels was on his way back from Manchester to his hometown Barmen when he stopped on the way to meet Marx, who was staying in Paris. And their discussions helped Marx better formulate the materialist understandings of history in which they had both started believing. They also, at this meeting, started working at their first joint book, which was an attack on Bruno Bauer and the young Hegelian group, which they had both previously belonged. Engels spent the next 8 months doing intensive communist propaganda and organizational work in Germany. During this period, he was in constant revolt against his father, who opposed his communist work and tried to get him to work in his factory. After just 2 weeks at his father's office, Engels rejected it completely and left Barmen to join Marx. Marx, by that time, had again become the target of feudal authorities. The Prussian king had brought pressure on the French king, who expelled Marx from Paris. Marx was forced to move to Brussels, indulged him along with his wife, an 8-month-old child. And this is where Engels came and set up house right next to Marx's house. Marx, in the meantime, had done deep work and had developed the main features of the New World Outlook, which they had discussed at their earlier meeting in Brussels. Both Marx and Engels started intensive joint work. This was, as Engels said, to develop the new outlook in all possible directions. The result was the historic book, The German Ideology, which only got published almost 100 years later. The main purpose of this book, served at that time, was for the two great thinkers to clarify old understanding and set up the pillars of the New World Outlook, which later came to be known as Marxism. Marx and Engels had become Marxists. And that's the end of chapter 4. Now I can post this in this chat for you guys, I think. Let me see here. Or how? Trying to think. I'll just post in the Discord. That'll work easier, I think. And then I can pull that up myself. Okay. Stop sharing here. All right. So while I'm loading this, does anyone have any specific questions?
Yeah, I just like to make a couple of statements too, rather than a question. But I just think that this is more important than a lot of people try to give credit to. And what I'm saying is like some people may ask, like, what's the importance of the history of Marx and Engels? Like, why does that even matter? Why can't we, why do we have to, like, why can't we just learn their ideas and just take it from there? And I think that we would be skipping a major process, right? So what they contributed is a science. So if you want to do any science project, right? Let's say someone wants to check your methods, wants to check your data, wants to check where you've gotten stuff from. So it's important that we observe that what their surroundings are that help formulate their ideology, what was going on. Because if we don't, it's kind of idealist just to do that, right? So we're just going to take what they said, verbatim, and just try to apply it to our conditions, when we need to. It's necessary to look back at their conditions and why, and what helped formed their ideologies, what helped form these things. So, I mean, that's why it's very important, I think, that we understand the history, because as history, they're put into context, things that were evolving from before their time to their time, and then how it would later change into something else. So these are very important aspects that I think a lot of people don't give credit to. That's all I had as my statement for right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because seeing where they came from and like how they came to these ideas is, that's shows you like what they were doing with their time. But so wanted to go over real quick, at least, because I know last time especially those first 3 chapters had a bunch of terminology that is not part of most people's like everyday language. So it just some quick definition. So ideology is a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy. And then, an especially important one is the proletariat, which is the workers or working class people regarded collectively. The other objectively most important one would be the bourgeoisie, which is the capitalist class who own the most of the society's wealth and the means of production. Capital is an important definition, I feel like, because it is not money. Like, money is not capital. Capital is the durable produced goods that are in turn used as productive inputs for further production of goods and services. Philosophy, since obviously that's a major part of this book, is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. The despotism we went over already. And the next thing, it'll definitely be brought up as we're going past this Hegelian parts, is the dialectical materialism, which is the Marxist theory that political and historical events result from the conflict of social forces and are interpretable as a series of contradictions and their solutions. The conflict is believed to be caused by material needs. I think the only thing I would say to that definition is it's scientific theory, or the scientific method. So if you guys remember what the scientific method is from high school, just like thesis, antithesis, solution, and stuff, the exact same. That's and then praxis is an action or practice, such as an exercise or practice of an art. And then dogmatism is a belief or set of beliefs that is accepted by members of a group without being questioned or doubted. So that's just like a couple quick definitions for stuff. Johnny, I will send you. Actually, I'll post the YouTube video we watched in Discord for you guys, because it is basically just the German ideology itself, kind of broken up, and a little bit more easily digestible than just reading it. Trying to think as of the stuff Hegel. From what I've read in this, it doesn't entirely explain like what Hegel's concepts were, but Hegel was an idealist. So like idealism, that obviously when we say that we're against idealism and because we're dialectical materialists, Hegel was the person who came up and founded the philosophy of idealism with Hegelian dialectics, which Marx then turned into dialectical materialism and historical materialism. And it was done at a time when the church basically was in control of everything. So it was not necessarily revolutionary, but it was important at the time because it basically asserted that there was no real afterlife in that sense, but not in a way that just completely refuted religion and tore religion down.
All right, man.
Which is, it's good for us to take note of the fact that, like, Hegel didn't just tear religion down. But trying to think. I've been talking about Hegel, Marx, and Engels yesterday. Someone asked me some questions. I
think a good question that is asked may not just been probably isn't asked right now, but some people are under the interpretation that Marx invented socialism itself, and that's something that is not true. So that's something that I don't know if you want to talk on it or if you want me to speak on it a little bit.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So, yeah, Rob's right. So, was the founder of the like obviously Marxism itself, which is the use of dialectical materialism to observe the material conditions of the world or the society that you're looking at, and then use certain principles that he established in a way that would, change the material conditions of that area to push towards socialism, which is opposed to utopian socialism, which would be, anything that asserts that it's just going to be a perfect world and it's going to be, this amazing little ride and everyone's going to enjoy it. Obviously based in material reality of things, which is that the bourgeoisie are not, they're not going to give up their power. And they had established, part of it was establishing that capitalism or feudalism or whatever, any kind of ideology or economic system that is based on a material wealth rather than a collectivized group working together will always end with most of the wealth, whatever it may be. He used grain math in capital. So he took a look at, the rulers of the feudal area and the grain. And he basically what he found was that, all of that grain every time for hundreds of years always ended up in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And then those fewer people used that as a means to control, the masses, because everyone needs the grain. So he, Marx went about proving that and establishing that in a way that was, irrefutable. Like he mathematically proved that capitalism will always end a specific way, and it will always end in a way that is not conducive for growth of communities as a whole. And utopian socialists they still don't, but they didn't at the time. It had nothing to do with that. They just, they just thought that you could just, it would basically be on par with, people who say that you could vote socialism in our current system. Like that's a utopian ideology. Like that would be it's idealism. It's not based in reality at all. It's in a perfect world, things, would happen a specific way, but we don't live in that perfect world. So Marxism is how you apply that in a normal society that has, a ruling class who are obviously not going to give that power up. And then obviously that became the Marxism-Leninism, which is taking Marxism basically and actually applying it through praxis. And Lenin added some things in there, but more or less it was mainly the application of that in the real world and a test phase. And it actually, it worked because the USSR was established. So Marxism-Leninism is what came from that, which even further separates itself from a utopian socialist or an idealist society because, it tells you that you need to have these certain things in certain areas for you to be successful. And then obviously that became Maoism, which was more or less a simplification.
Can I add something in?
Yeah, good. Feel free.
And feel free anybody to ask any of these questions. I mean, this is an aspect where even people who are well read in Marxism have to continue to question certain things. So it's never, a bad thing. This is a moment where we all got to learn because, I've been studying Marxism for like 2 years now, and I'm always constantly second guessing myself and trying to reevaluate. Like, wait, okay, all right, dialectical materialism. Like, how the hell does this make sense in this particular situation? And I'm constantly always going through these things in my mind. And I know that we're kind of jumping the gun here. We're like giving you some oversight on some of the stuff on which we're going to be reading and the material. But I mean, within the material we've already went over, there's certain terms that came about that are kind of like buttering us up for this, right? So like something like that was mentioned earlier was like class antagonisms, and that's something that is a something that needs to be noted because it's like, what is a class antagonism? So does anybody want to give a shot at what a class antagonism is in the class? I guess, or could try to explain it.
Hey, Conrad. No, I can't explain it, and I don't have a question. But once you said that, I realized that I remembered that had piqued my brain when that was being talked about, and I don't even remember now what it was in context with. Honestly, like I'm so low at like building a foundation of knowledge on any of this. It takes me so long to process all of this information that it's hard for me to even like ask questions. But I see what you're saying, like with just like some of the terms and stuff, like just try to pick out some of that and remember to. But no, I can't remember.
No, I don't
remember
need to.
when he was reading that.
Good.
That it was really interesting. I can't remember what it was though.
I mean, I don't need to.
Yeah, no, and that's something that is good for us, in general. Like, if you see anything, make sure you say something or write it down or put it in the chat so we can come back, because some of these chapters are long-winded. Class. So let's look at what is class. So what do you think class is? Do you have something on that?
Class, I mean, the different class of how much we have us being put into different class. There's the upper class and the lower class and the middle class. I don't know how to explain it except, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you said that exactly how you said that, because that's where a lot of people have, right? We kind of split ourselves up and separate each other in these stratuses that are really, there's a disillusion or an illusion in a way that we're really split up in two classes, right? We have the bourgeoisie, which is the owner, the private owning class, and then we have those that work for the private owning class, which is the working class. That's the rest of us. So when they say class antagonism, right, they're talking about those two classes that have conflict. And what are I could give a list of different antagonisms, but the main one in which we typically focus on is labor, right? So if you're working for somebody, he's trying to make money off of your labor, you're trying to make money off of your labor as well. So who gets the most of your of the value of your labor? There's a conflict there. That's a class antagonism. And who wins out? So this is a good thing to keep in mind. And when we talk about dialectics, we're speaking of opposites and how everything is connected and how everything is resolved through contradictions, right? Through we have these contradictions of these opposites all over the place, and that society and the world in which we live in develops through these conflicts, through these antagonisms, through these different contradictions that we have, throughout time. And this is what we're examining now, and that's what Marx was examining back then. And he was taking this is what they're giving the ideologies that where they're speaking about dialectics, about idealism, materialism, and all these things are going to come together and be synthesized around this. And observing the conflicts between the feudal society and the capitalist society, observing the conflicts between the working class and the owning class, and watching how things changed as the Industrial Revolution was happening right under Marx and Engels' nose. I'm sorry, I said a lot, but that's the gist of it. But it's good that those small questions, you know, note it. Please note it, because as we carry on through these lessons, there's going to be a lot of times when these same terminologies are brought up, and if you don't have the understanding of that, the rest of it doesn't really fall into place.
Right. I have another actual small question on that. So I kind of remember. So that was the part that he was talking about with these two classes, and then it kind of concreted when Comrade Jake was talking about the grain, however they did money. But so this is when he was talking about that with these two classes, that it's proven that there will always be conflict. But like under capitalism with these two classes, that and everything, there will always be conflict, right? Is that where when he was talking about the class antagonisms, is that what he said that was
kind of
okay?
Also, that's just Jake's name because he has the paid for Zoom. I'm off.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't. I have my camera zoomed over, so
yeah, well, Rob and I would we kind of discussed it for a second. We weren't sure how to go about that. So the class antagonisms between them is more so that capitalism will always have the capital ending up in fewer and fewer hands. The
means of production.
What they do with that capital itself is, how they get it is by taking your surplus labor. So the class antagonism is that you as a worker produce the company wherever you work. You bring in so much money. The class antagonism is, they are thieving. They're stealing for about 80% from you. So what you're getting paid is a fractional amount of what's actually there. And so, the contradiction becomes, the antagonism contradiction becomes, from that right there, that theft of the surplus labor, because all profit is theft. So any profit that a company makes, off of its workers is theft, because they didn't make that. The CEO didn't do anything. So, to take that is where the contradiction comes in and becomes an antagonism, because it's basically them saying it's, well, we're just going to keep doing this and you can't do anything about it because you work for us. And eventually, basically, the antagonisms come to a head, or they should. And the head, that it comes to is typically workers want the money that they're owed.
Yeah, and to add in on that capitalists function off of this constant need of making profits and maximizing their profits. So what eventually happens is they stretch maximizing their profits so far. Not only does it affect labor and stealing from our labor, but it attaches itself to every other aspect of the economy, where the places that we live is shelter, food, medicine, all these different things are not there for its use. It's there for a profit. So it becomes a conflict with the person who needs medicine versus the person who's trying to make a profit off of the medicine. If that makes sense.
Can I add something, Rob? This is Johnny. And it's not only that they need to maximize, but the way capitalism works is they need to make more this year than they did last year, or else they're actually losing money because of the cost of living and the price of everything goes up with time. So if they're not making more money than they did last year, they're actually losing money. So that's the vicious cycle. That's the snake that's eating its head.
That's the false dichotomy, though. It's like you can't lose money that you never had. So they push that. Like, and CEOs know that. Like the CEO, like Elon Musk, he knows that he can't lose money that he didn't have. But if he pushes the idea that he lost money because he didn't make a bigger profit, then that lie just gets perpetuated. And so, like, that's definitely something it's important, is because like we know that. Like, if we didn't make it, then it's, oh well, try again tomorrow. But they don't like that because, like you said, that they have to make more and more and more. It's infinite economic growth, basically. But on a finite planet is the issue. And the capitalism, when it started, capitalism had a purpose. Because if you look, I'll have to find the diagram, Rob's, there's a levels of conflict based on dialectical materialism. And it was basically the feudal lords into the class conflict was between the feudal lords and the bourgeoisie class, who at the time were underneath the feudal lords. And when they had their revolution, established capitalism, it completely, it revolutionized the stuff like crops. Like, instead of having a cow doing it and a couple people, we started making machines to do it because we wanted to maximize, the profit and get it done as best we could. And so, like, capitalism at one point had a purpose, and it was actually a fairly decent purpose, and it just has overstayed its welcome because a couple people at the top, they're just like, we do this, we could just make all sorts of money.
I have a really good article that explains it too. It's called The History of the Birth of Capital. The history of I can't recall the article right now, but I can get it. And if anybody's interested, just hit me up.
Yeah.
The history of slavery, the birth of capital. That's what it's called. The history of slavery, the birth of capital. So the article.
That title is really, I like that title because it basically points out the fact that, like, whether it's chattel slavery or wage slavery, like, we're still slaves.
Hey, Conrad, can you repeat the name of that article, please?
I believe it's the history of slavery and the birth of capital. I can't recall the author, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Although, I was when Rob asked about class, I added a definition into that list. So I figured it'd be a good time to bring up that. So the class is just a system of ordering a society in which people are divided into sets based on perceived social or economic status. So it's an important, bit there is perceived social or economic status, because it's all just perception. Most of it's not real. Like, it's just material things, and they don't make someone better or worse. But if you have more of something, then there's a perception there that that you're better, that you're smarter, or you are more frugal, know how to budget better, blah blah blah. And they start. That's basically they use all of those things. The first people to do it were, like, back when slaves when slavery was ending. They had people, obviously, that were living basically in the same kind of, basically almost the same conditions as slaves. But when the slaves were allowed to walk freely, you had the ruling class put their ops out to go out and put this false idea that somehow you were better because your dirt was on white skin and it was not on black skin, and that then it doesn't matter if the slaves are free then, because you are still preventing the class from working together by telling them that they're better solely because of their skin. And the people in poverty a lot of times are less educated because it's harder. Like, it's like a paywall. Education is locked behind a paywall. So they purposely prey on the least educated by, number one, by always, making it harder and harder to pay for an education. I mean, even look at schools now. Like, parents can barely afford to send their kids to public school. Like, and public school education is objectively terrible. And so, that's been a thing forever. They lock it all behind this paywall so that you have to spend money to be able to participate, like, functionally in society and actually have an understanding. So they lock that understanding away from you. And then they're able to, put into your head nonsense ideas, and you don't know any better because, they can apply it in a way that makes sense to someone who has no understanding of economy or societal structures or something like that. Like, and they've been doing that since the beginning. But it's also important, like, saying that's also important, that you don't want to reduce everything immediately to class.
Yeah, I wanted to touch in on that too. Kind of what you just said right there is going to help, like, kind of broaden what I was going to say. So, yeah, I mean, with this, there's between the two classes of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right? They create these different income levels and different aspects of society to use as gatekeepers to the bourgeois class. For example, back in after Bacon's Rebellion, they implemented these certain concessions to white people or white workers as a way of status and pinned them against the rest of the working class. Also, there's this notion that there's this middle class, right, that separates you from the labor class in a sense, right? They want to teach you that there is this status that you could work up to, this American dream, so to speak, that you can one day have this picket fence and this and become this middle class. And, this is the things that they do in our society. They'll have these suburbs with the gated communities, and then they'll marginalize everyone else that's being exploited more than what you might be getting exploited for. And it creates this division amongst the working class. And there's something called, where we'll learn about too, is the petty bourgeois or the petite bourgeois, the small business owners that really don't have any rulership over anything, but they own a sense of capital. Then you have the labor aristocracy, this sense of this high standard of the laborers that may be the high skilled workers that are making $75 an hour, so to speak, and they kind of protect their interest away from the rest of the working class. Because, for example, like in Chicago, during race riots and things like that, the union, and then after the civil rights movement, they did not want black people or anybody of color to take away their jobs, right? This is somewhat of a labor aristocracy that was formed, and they pinned the working class against each other, because we all know that together we'll be a way bigger force. And other than then there's other things that we'll talk about within the sphere, but there's only two actual classes, being the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But one thing I wanted to say real quick before I turn my mic off was that with the science aspect of it, it's we'll learn more about the dialectical materialism aspect as we go further into this, is that we can't just jump from capitalism to communism, right? That's impractical. That's like that's that utopian mindset that we could just make it happen just by saying let it be, and we all agree on it. The scientific aspect of it that Marx examines is that it develops through quantity and quality. As things the quantity of things changes, then eventually the quality of things will change, and that it happens in stages. So there's be a lot of different things that we can examine on this question, but I'm gonna leave some of it open because we have a lot of material to cover. We got 32 chapters, so it's gonna cover a lot of this. But that's all I had to say for now.
What is this WebP? It's just stupid. I was trying to find the level of conflict, but it's not. I don't know what this image type is. This is ridiculous. But I did find this probably easier to read one, honestly. Yeah, see if I can get it to pull up right. Oh yes, and then okay. Save this. I'm just gonna drop it in this here chat. I think. Let's see. Sweet.
Was there any other terminologies that popped out to anybody?
I'm looking through them again now.
I wanted to say something real quick. I forgot. I was going to say Karl Marx was writing on his honeymoon. That someone was dedicated to his work. That's all I got to say. I was thinking about that earlier when you read that. I'm like, wow, he was on his honeymoon.
Well, I mean, if you read the Prussian, like their government that watched him, dude, just like that, all he did was theorize and then would like sleep at random hours. Like they just, if I'll have to find it, but I'm pretty sure they described him as like inhuman because he just like stay up for days and then sleep for a couple hours and then all of a sudden stay up for days again, just like pacing back and forth in the same area. Like, he was absolutely dedicated. Also, if you guys ever have questions, you feel free to add me in the Discord or whatever and message me directly. If I know sometimes questions, it becomes difficult, to ask questions because you don't want to feel like you're being judged or anything. I know that was one thing with my other class that helped a couple of them was instead of asking publicly at first, they would just kind of ask me privately until they got more of a flow of things because obviously capitalism itself is set up that way. So it's set up to breed individualism as everyone for themselves, and that a lot of times ends up people being worried that they're that no one's going to be willing to help them. So if there's anything you guys are confused about or anything like that, you don't feel like asking it in class publicly, feel free to message me and privately, and I have no problem discussing it with you guys. That's basically all I do in my free time anyway, is communist stuff. So like if I'm not spending like 3 hours on the phone with Rob talking about communism, typically then too.
Because I won't shut up.
No, we just, once we get on a roll, it's just like.
I like how you had an echo when you said, because I won't shut up. So you said it twice.
Pretty funny.
It's big, it's bad sometimes. There's been a couple times where we've gone like way over class time on our other class. Just like people, they'll just everyone will ask questions and we'll just sit and it just becomes just like amplification effect. Like we're like, oh yeah, also that makes me think of this. But as far as also the terms, I am gonna update those whenever you guys ask about any terms. I'll add them in there, obviously. Whenever Rob thinks of some, I ask him to send them my way. Whenever I think of some, I'll add them, and it'll just be a constantly growing list. That way, you guys can kind of just take it with you as well, like, and always have access to it, and then you can, have an easy definition for stuff if someone asks you. And then also it becomes, everyone has access to it all over the place.
Well, I gotta sign off. But there's one last one to add to the list is Bernsteinian. Add that to the list. Then I gotta go.
Yeah, I think that's a good stopping point. I'll add Bernstein in there. But yeah, all right. Like I said, if anyone has any questions, feel free to message me. Also, I'm kind of working on how I'm doing my questions in class. I know how my other class works. I know when to pause and just when to explain things. So if I'm ever paused when we're reading, that's actually, but most of the time I'm seeing if anyone has any questions, because I try not to assume anything. But if you guys would prefer me to just like read all the way through stuff and explain stuff at the end, really it's kind of your guy. Whatever helps you guys learn the most is what's best for me. So something to think about, and that's something you all can also feel free to message me about. Is just however if certain things help you learn better than others, we can absolutely work on a way to make this class conducive to everybody's learning, so that we're not leaving anybody behind and we're not being exclusionary or anything like that.
Appreciate it.
I have a question that's completely off topic. Did I see someplace that we have a UPM meeting at 7? Did I read that somewhere? Now I can't find it. Maybe I made it up in my head. I made that up in my head, maybe possibly.
If you see something at 7, I think you're looking at a meeting that was brought up for 7. That's what you're thinking of. That should be coming out any minute.
Okay, so I did see that someplace. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a meeting at 7.
Is it Zoom or Discord?
If it's Zoom, we better hurry up and get off the Zoom if they're going to use this one, because it's going to be coming out in like 12 minutes.
Okay.
We'll find out shortly.
Do you know where that link was?
I don't think the link got dropped yet. I just think that just look in the Discord or just ask Mark.
Yeah, I will. Okay, thank you.
All right, guys. Until next week.
All right, all power, red salute.
All power. Thank you.
Red salute.
devil guns. Didn't matter when the greeters struck. Didn't matter when they stole your mother's son. Now everyone's out of their mind. Bullshit, these unemployment lines. Don't know the casual